I'm going to provide a very simple and repeatable method that you can use to taste and evaluate wine. Before we get started, I thought it'd be good to go over a few notes. The first one is my only rule, and that is to have a clean palate. You don't want to be trying to taste and evaluating wine if, for example, you just had a cup of black coffee. If you just want to have a drink of wine, that's fine. But if you truly want to taste and evaluate the wine, a clean palate is very important. The next note is, when I'm tasting and evaluating wine, I keep a little diary of which I can take down notes about what I smell, what I taste, and the overall feel of that wine. So let's get started with our method of how to taste and evaluate wine. The name of the method is the 5 S's. It has 5 steps. Each step starts with the letter S. The steps are C, that's spelled S-E-E, swirl, sniff, sip, and savor. I'm hoping you have a glass of wine with you and you can actually follow through with the steps. You can actually do it with me today, and you'll be able to see that with a little bit of practice, this system is extremely simple, very repeatable, and being repeatable, it allows you to compare different wines that you've tasted and evaluated, because you have this concrete reference point that you've always tasted and evaluated wine the same way. So let's get started. Step 1 is to see. Before we actually get into that step, I just want to make one last note. The C step is much more difficult with red wine than it is with white wine. I have a bottle of white wine with me to show you the fact that you can see right through a bottle of white wine. You can actually see what's on the other side. With red wines, that's a lot more difficult. I selected a red wine to do my tasting with you. The wine I'm using is Baco Noir. It's a French-American hybrid, which means it's a grape that is crossed between American grapes and French grapes. So let's get started with the first step. C means to visually inspect the wine. Look down directly into your glass. The wine should be reflecting light. It should be crystal clear. Think of it as looking at a glass of spring water. Spring water is very clear and it seems to sparkle. That's the way your wine should be. If your wine appears hazy, don't be concerned. Natural wine producers today, when they produce a wine in, quote, what they call the natural way of doing it, they do not filter their wine, so it's going to appear hazy. The haziness is from particles being suspended in the wine. The next way to visually inspect the wine is to take your glass and tilt it sideways at about a 45-degree angle. Look at the surface of the wine. It should have a disc-like appearance. Think of it kind of like a frisbee appearance. It has depth. It also, you still see that reflection of light. It should not be flat and dull. If it's flat and dull, you probably have a bad wine. With red wine, because of the difficulty of looking at the wine, looking through the wine, one good way to help you do that is with a light source, put a piece of white paper between you and the light source, and then use the white paper to help you actually look at the wine. That's a good way to be able to visually see red wine a little better. The next thing we look at when we look and visually inspect the wine is its color. Red wines can be from a pale red to a deep dark, even purple, intense red color. This particular wine has I would call it more of a medium red. That is the expected color for this wine. The last thing we're going to visually inspect with the wine, again, tilt that glass at that 45-degree angle and slowly return it so that the wine rolls down the glass. You'll see what appears to be liquid is adhering to the side of the glass. That's called the legs or tears of the wine. The thicker, heavier, and slower those tears are, could tell us a couple things about the wine. If those tears are heavy and thick, the wine could be a sweet wine. It's very syrupy, and the syrupiness and the sugar adheres to the glass. Again, if the tears are heavy and slowly go down the glass, it's possible that there's a significant amount of alcohol in this wine. It could be a very robust alcohol wine. Lastly, those tears and legs tell us a little bit about the body of the wine. And we'll talk about body when we get into the sip stage of our process. Now, on to the swirl step. To swirl, I place my front two fingers across the base of the glass and around the stem, and I slowly, in circular motions, make that wine move in the glass. What I'm doing is agitating, aerating, and increasing the surface area of the wine. What that does is force molecules from the wine up into the glass so that I can better smell those molecules. Don't try to over swirl. This is something that is done easily and smoothly. You do not want to over agitate the wine. You don't want wine slopping out of the glass onto the table. One other way that a lot of people like to swirl, show their expertise, is to swirl in midair. You're just looking for trouble. You're going to end up, if you have friends around you, you're going to be having them wear wine out of your glass as you slop it through the air. I prefer to keep that glass on the table and then, like I said, easily use those circular motion. One last note about swirling. I often place my hand over the top of the glass to keep those molecules in the glass, and that also helps me better smell the wine. So now we're on to the sniff step of our process. Pick up the glass. You cannot be bashful about this. You can't worry about what people think about what you look like when you do this. You need to force your nose deep into the glass and take a real deep sniff. I make mental notes of that first sniff, put it down again, swirl it, and take another sniff. With Baco Noir, one of the things you pick up is one of its signature aromas, and it's a barnyard aroma. When I say barnyard, think of what a barnyard's like. Dirty, musty, wet, a lot of earthy type tones. But also there's some aromas in a barn that you're very familiar with. The barnyard aroma or Baco Noir is what I expect in the wine, and a lot of wines have their signature aromas. These signature aromas there are three types of aromas with wine. The signature aroma is the primary aroma, and every grape has them. These primary aromas are a direct evidence of what the grape is. Each grape is distinct in that primary aroma. A couple primary aromas that you may find interesting. Syrah has a raw meat type of aroma. Riesling has a petroleum, almost kerosene-like aroma. And Cabernet Sauvignon can have a cedar type aroma, and some people even pick up pencil shavings as if you just sharpened a pencil. Those aromas are directly from the grape. Other types of aromas, Sauvignon Blanc smells like mowed grass. So those are the types of aromas you're going to pick up at first. And in some cases they're not overbearing, so you really have to seek them out when you're sniffing the wine. Also in sniffing wine, one mistake that's often made is that a person will pick up their wine after swirling, sniff, 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 sniff. You need to realize that your nose has one thing anatomically that creates an issue. Your nose adapts to what it smells. If you continually sniff like I just did, without taking a break, you're going to lose all sense of what you're smelling. So you need to have that 20 to 30 second pause in between. Now, again, I was talking about three different types of aromas. The next type of aroma is called the secondary aromas. The secondary aromas come from the actual fermentation process itself. As we learned in the first video I did about the history of wine, Fermentation is basically the process where yeast converts sugars into alcohol for wine. But there are many other chemical processes going on in the fermentation process, and they bring out other aromas. If you do fermentation in oak, you're going to probably pick up some oaky aromas. And aromas are different between American, French, and Eastern European oak. Also, you could pick up vanilla. Some people pick up spicy notes, and also some people actually say they have picked up banana-like aromas. Those are the secondary aromas, and they are a direct result of fermentation. The last aromas are the tertiary aromas. They are processed, or they are a product of the aging process itself. So if you age wine in oak, we go back to those same things. You're going to pick up those oaky aromas and the distinct aromas across the different types of oak. You could pick up charcoal if it's aged in like a bourbon barrel that has been toasted inside. You can pick up aromas like truffles and mushrooms, more earthy type aromas. Now that we've talked about aromas, I should say one more note. If you're tasting and evaluating wine with friends, we all taste and smell things differently. Our life experience brings out what we can readily smell. Bakers and chefs pick up a lot of yeast type smells. Chefs, a lot of seasoning type smells. The nutmegs and the different seasonings, pepper and things like that. I pick up the raw meat smell from Syrah because I come from a rural area and I was around a lot of meat processing as a kid. So don't be surprised that what you're smelling is different than what your friend is smelling. There's probably going to be some commonalities, and a lot of people pick up similar things. The last part of aromas I'll discuss is what are some bad aromas you might pick up. The first one is a skunky smell. That's pretty obvious, I'm sure. A mousy smell is one, and I guess the best way to describe that is the smell of what an expired mouse smells like. Vinegar, a vinegar smell. Mustiness, smells like that, and one other, the kind of sour milk type of smell. If you have those aromas that you're picking up, you probably have a wine that isn't drinkable. Now we're on to that step that we've all been waiting for, and that is to sip. We get to taste our wine. Before we do that, I want a little note for everybody. Don't be upset if you're not picking up a lot of aromas when you smell the wine, and something that is complementary to that when we taste the wine, if you're not picking up a lot of flavors. It's perfectly okay, just pick up a couple. As you use this system over time and you learn to focus on tasting and evaluating wine, you're going to start to pick up more of those aromas and more of those flavors. If you picked up a charcoal type aroma when you were smelling the wine, it's highly likely that you're going to pick up a charcoal flavor to your wine. The same with things like citrus, lemon, lime, orange. If you pick up those aromas, you're likely going to pick those up as flavors. When we sip or taste our wine in this stage, we're not going to focus on those flavors. We're going to focus on tactile and taste sensation. What are those things? On the tactile side, you have body, temperature, astringency. On the taste side, we have things that we're familiar with: sour, sweet, salty, and bitter. We can eliminate salty. Wine does not have salt, so we're only going to be focusing on the three. When we do this sip assessment, be sure to take a large enough sip into your mouth that it coats all areas of your mouth, the roof of your mouth, the sides of your mouth, your tongue. You need to do that so that we can sense all those things I just described. Different areas of your tongue pick up different tastes and different sensations. So let's take a sip. You probably noticed my jaws and lips moving quite a lot when I took that sip. That's called chewing the wine. You need to do that, and you should practice that a little bit. That helps move that wine around in your mouth, coat the different areas of your mouth, and not only release some of those molecules so we can more easily taste them. So let's talk about the tactile sensation. Tactile being touch, feel, how that wine feels. The first one is body, and the easiest one to understand. I have a couple scales for body. The water scale that I have and a milk scale. You use either one. The water scale starts on the light end with water and on the full body end with syrup. Think of maple syrup. It's thick. It's got some weight. You can feel it. Water, on the other hand, has no weight. It's thin. The other scale is a milk scale. Skim milk on the light body side and whole milk on the full body side. Skim milk is, again, thin like water, and it doesn't have that creamy weight texture to it that whole milk has. Whole milk is much more heavy in your mouth, and you get that creamy feeling. So for the Baco Noir, what's the body like? Well, it tends between light and medium, and for Baco Noir, and this one's probably tends towards light. Now let's talk about temperature, one that is also fairly easy. There's a scale for temperature: warm, and some people actually use the word burning, that it burns their throat. Well, what's doing that? Well, it's the alcohol content. Warm wines will have less alcohol. Those that really warm your throat or, quote, burn your throat are high alcohol wines. Baco Noir is in that kind of medium range, so we're probably talking 12 to 12.5% alcohol. Now, astringency. This one is a little bit different. Astringency comes from a chemical called tannin. Tannin comes from the stems, the skins, and the seeds of the grapes. All wines have some tannin. However, white wines have less tannin. This is because during the fermentation process, white wines, the skins and the stems are removed prior to fermentation. So their contact with skins and stems is way, way less than red wine. It has a little bit of tannin because of the seeds. All wines need tannin. It acts as a preservative. In addition, tannin can have an impact on the body of the wine. Tannin can increase that body. For red wines, because they are fermented with the skins and stems, as well as having the seeds, tannin runs the entire scale of the tannin scale, light tannin to high tannin. Wines that have less tannin tend to be, quote, people call them smooth. Wines that have higher tannins, some people actually call them, they're rough for them to drink, and they don't really care for them. The best way to describe the taste sensation of tannin is, some people call it, it's rough in the mouth. It feels like dry dirt in your mouth. It's furry. It's a furry feeling in my mouth. It causes my mouth to kind of draw up, like pucker up a little bit. Baco Noir probably is a medium tannin wine. The tannin's there, and you can taste it, but it's not overbearing. Now let's talk about the taste sensations. The taste sensations, let's start with the easiest one, sweetness. We all know what sweetness is. It's sugar. The sugar scale goes from sweet to dry. In between you have semi-sweet and semi-dry. On the sweet side, wines contain about 5% residual sugar. But what is residual sugar? Residual sugar is the amount of sugar that's still remaining in the wine after fermentation. How does that, if we're converting all the sugar to alcohol, how is there more sugar left? The vintner can decide if they want the wine to be somewhat sweet. They can chemically stop fermentation to allow some sugars to remain. The other way that can occur is just before bottling, the vintner can decide, I want this wine to be a little sweet. I can add sugar back to the wine prior to bottling. So 5% on the sweet side. On the dry side, it's 0%. There is no sugar. Semi-sweet is in the 3 to 4% range, and semi-dry is in the 1 to 2% range. There are wines that are above that 5% range. Wines like late harvest ice wines, dessert wines, and fortified wines like port. Let's cover sour. Sour is not bad. Everyone thinks that, why would you want your wine to taste sour? Sour comes from the acidity of a wine. The acidity of wine is extremely important. That's what keeps it from tasting flat. Without the acidity, wine would be absolutely flat and we would not enjoy it. Acidity gives it that fresh, ripe punch that it really needs. Acid goes from low to high. The Baco Noir is probably on the high side, and that's what you would expect. Now, let's talk about bitter. Wine should not be bitter. You usually pick up the bitter as you start to swallow wine in the aftertaste. Bitterness usually shows up in the back of your mouth and in your throat. Bitter is a taste we do not like as humans. So wine should not be bitter. White wine should absolutely never be bitter, because that bitterness also comes from the skins, the stems, and the seeds, the same place. It's caused by the same chemical tannin. It doesn't mean a high tannin wine is going to be bitter, because the bitterness is extracted somewhat differently. So white wine should never be bitter. If you have a white wine that's bitter, you probably have a bad wine. Red wines can have a hint of bitterness, and it should be a hint. No one wants to taste something that's bitter. If your aftertaste is intensely bitter, you're not going to enjoy the wine. So let's talk about aftertaste a little bit. Aftertaste to me comes in 3 varieties. If you swallow your wine, and as you're swallowing, the taste we've been describing, the body, the flavors, everything that we've talked about so far, if that just blatantly disappears as you're swallowing it, it has no aftertaste. A wine should have an aftertaste. At least a really good wine should have an aftertaste. Then there's the pleasant aftertaste. As you're swallowing it, you're still getting a real nice feel. That taste is really nice. And then you have to decide, how long does that aftertaste last? Does it last long enough that I can really enjoy it? Then we've already talked about that bitter aftertaste, or that aftertaste that just is not any good. So now we're through the sip stage, and we're going to the last step in our process, and that's called savor. Savor brings all these elements together. It brings the color, the body, all the taste sensations, the flavor sensations, our aromas, the tactile sensations. All those things come together in something that's called balance. Every vintner, their goal is to make a balanced wine, which uses all those flavors and aromas to become a completely complex and balanced wine. That's what they're striving for. However, every wine is not completely balanced. And just because it's not completely balanced doesn't mean it's a bad wine. If things are just slightly out of balance, it's still going to be a very nice drinking wine. However, if it is dramatically out of balance, if the tannins are just through the roof and completely overpower the rest of the wine, we're probably not going to enjoy it, and we're probably not going to purchase that wine again. You want to be as close to balance as you can be. We've completed 5 S's in our assessment. I hope you understood those. I hope you were following along. I hope you had that glass of wine with you. If you didn't, the next time you get your glass of wine, walk through the 5 S's and focus on tasting and evaluating your wine. As you do this over time, you'll get much better at it, and like I said before, you'll start to pick up different aromas and different flavors, and you'll be able to tell those different tactile and taste sensations much more easily. I would tell you to go out and get one of the wines that you really, really like, that you buy all the time, and run through the 5 S's on that wine. It'll be interesting how much differently you might think about the wine as you go through the steps. It would also be good to do this on a wine you never drank before, so you can really learn to appreciate that wine. Again, the 5 S's allow you to taste and evaluate a wine, and if you use that process when you're tasting wine, different wines, you'll be able to compare those wines because you have a concrete base from which to work to be able to compare them. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've enjoyed doing it with you. Please remember to practice your 5 S's. As we go forward in our next video, we'll be going over types and styles of wine. And as always, raise a glass and have a drink.